when I pushed my bike along this trail, the trail collapsed underneath me. Just my body weight disintegrated the trail. And I ended up falling about 30 meters into a ravine. It wasn't a vertical fall at all, but it was pretty close to vertical for most of it. And then the last 8, 10, 12 meters was a vertical fall into the riverbed. And I just remember the whole thing happening in such slow motion. Like at the start, I had no idea what was going on because it just happened. There was absolutely no warning. But then I remember falling and trying to grab onto rocks and things all around me. And every time I'd grab onto something, it would come along with me for the fall. And yeah, I remember thinking, like, this is pretty much it. I'm not going to survive this fall because it's just too far down into the ravine.
Welcome to Seek Travel Ride, where we share the stories and experiences of people taking amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hello everyone, welcome back to Seek Travel Ride. I'm currently actually taking a short break from releasing new episodes, but over the next few weeks I'm resharing some of my all-time favourite conversations from the show. Today's episode features none other than Alee Denham, someone many of you will know as the voice behind CyclingAbout. This episode was originally released in June 2024. I'll be back with fresh new episodes of the podcast in a few weeks. And in the meantime, enjoy my conversation with Alee. Hello, I'm your host, Bella Malloy, and I'm very excited to introduce my guest for today's episode of Seek Travel Ride, Alee Denham. Alee is a self-proclaimed bicycle nomad, having travelled by bicycle through countless countries around the world for over 12 years. Chances are, if you are into bicycle travel, that you will be familiar with Alee, who is the face and brains behind CyclingAbout, what many of us regard as the premier resource for bike touring information. Having spent so much of his life dedicated to this form of travel, there would be fewer people who are better placed than Alee to provide guidance, in-depth reviews and advice for how to get started with your own bicycle touring journey. It's safe to say Alee's breadth of experience of travel on two wheels is truly impressive. Having travelled across 6 continents, his form of exploration isn't just about finding the quickest point from A to B through a country. Alee often chooses the most rugged routes, that cliched road less travelled, and also makes a point of seeing a country in depth. This can mean spending months on end in one country at a time in order to fully appreciate, learn and understand the terrain, people, culture and wildlife which he encounters on the way. He has toured in many different styles, sometimes alone, sometimes with company, but what has remained the same is Alee's curiosity and eagerness to explore and learn more about the world in this manner. With someone who has spent so much of his adult life travelling slowly through the landscape on two wheels, I truly cannot wait to hear the insights and experiences which we will get into as I learn all about Alee and what it's like to be cycling about this world of ours. Alee Denham, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Like I said, Alee, I am super excited. But before we get into learning about all these experiences and insights that you can share for us here on the podcast, the question which I start my show with, and I ask this of all my guests, is, Alee, do you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
Yeah, I do actually. It was this tiny little blue cruiser, just a single speed, back pedal brake. I don't even think it had any handbrake on the bars. But the quirky thing about this bike is that it had really long crank arms and really wide pedals. And so whenever I went around a corner and was pedaling, I would crash. And I'm pretty sure my parents were trying to set me up for failure.
Oh my gosh. So you would have developed this cool style growing up of knowing how not to crash around a corner eventually. But I wonder, in a weird way, has that set you off this little world that you've landed in where you review the absolute infinite detail of every bike now. If you could do a bike review on the little blue pedal cruiser, I wonder what you'd say. How many stars would you give it?
I would get so slammed.
For you then, Ali, moving on from the bike with the long arms that wanted to spend you into a crash and around every corner, was riding bikes something that you did in Australia going up? Or did you, like many Aussies, sort of ride bikes as a kid and then hit your teenage years and sort of not ride bikes and then get back into bike travel?
So bikes have been a long passion of mine ever since I was a little kid. So from using that tiny little blue cruiser, I moved on to a BMX, and I would just ride around both days, sunrise to sunset over the weekends, just visiting friends and going to the park, just exploring all of the nature around where I lived. So, yeah, it's been an obsession since I was a little kid, and it hasn't stopped since then either.
Clearly, like I mentioned in my intro, you've been touring around the world since I think it's about 2012. But was that then something that you would relate back to just loving being out in the saddle, wheels rolling through the landscape? The idea to even travel by bicycle, can you even remember where that first came to you?
Yeah, I can actually. There's like a really pivotal moment that I had. So when I was 18, just after high school, I went on my first overseas adventure, and I was backpacking in Malaysia on the island of Borneo. And that trip in itself was a crazy trip because I tried to hike across the island with a local guide that was in his 70s. But we'll put that to the side because after doing that big hike, I was sitting in a hostel and telling this guy how much I love traveling, how much I love cycling. I was talking about all the racing I was doing in Australia and all of the places I'd been to go and ride bikes. And he was like, if you love traveling and you love bikes, why don't you travel on a bike? And I just genuinely, it hadn't crossed my mind at that point that you could travel on a bike across continents. I just wasn't exposed to the idea of bike touring really, because in Australia, it's just not a really common thing that you would do as a child or even see people doing. You're in France, and I'm sure you've traveled a lot in Germany and the Netherlands. There's kids with panniers absolutely everywhere. It's like such a normal thing. But yeah, for me, it wasn't until I was 18 that I actually started considering the idea of traveling on a bicycle. And it just so happened that as soon as I got back from that trip, I became friends with somebody who had just gone on his first bike tour. So the next university holidays, we went on a bike trip to Myanmar.
Wow. How long did you spend touring around Myanmar and discovering that country for?
That was a month, and it was actually at a really bad time to go and visit the country. It was just after the monk uprising. So I think it would have been about 2008. And so large sections of Myanmar were just completely closed off to tourism. It meant that you had to get in a bus to get anywhere, or you needed to be in a private car. And we wanted to cycle. So we would get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go past these military checkpoints on our bikes while everyone's sleeping, just so that we could ride these sections of roads that we wanted to ride on. It was completely ridiculous.
I'm just thinking there, like, what a baptism of fire in a way as well. But there's two ways you could look at that. There'd be people who'd look at that and go, oh my God, that was too chaotic. Not sure that I would do that again. Or there would be people that might look at the extra adventure, which made that trip a little bit more spicy, perhaps. And following you and following your channel and seeing your YouTube videos, you do yearn to add a little bit of adventure into your travels. Do you think, in a way, having that experience in Myanmar be like that maybe stoked the fire for bike travel a little bit more?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways that was the hardest bike trip I've ever done. Just in terms of logistics, working out how to get between these different regions and pushing the boundaries to the point where people with massive guns were ordering us onto buses. Yeah, it was just complete madness the whole time. But it really lit a fire in my friend and I. And we actually planned to cycle from Europe to Australia together straight after that trip. We were on the plane and we were like, if we can cross countries like this, we can cross continents. And yeah, It didn't end up turning out that I would travel with him from Europe to Australia, but I did end up doing that trip.
You did that trip on a tandem bike, didn't you?
I did. I actually started that trip, we started that trip, my former partner and I, on two separate bikes. And it quickly became apparent that solution was not going to work because my former partner was just having panic attacks on all of the really busy roads, roads without shoulders where buses and trucks are passing within millimeters. That was just absolutely freaking her out. And it got really bad by the time we were in Istanbul.
Heard Istanbul can be really, really bad to cycle into, actually, from previous guests.
It is a nasty city to try and cycle across. There's definitely safe ways to get in and out of the city that people need to research before they go there. But yeah, we started on two bikes. It became apparent we needed a solution. So I decided to get us a tandem to see how that would go. And it was the perfect solution. So Kat, my partner at the time, she put her faith in me as a rider to make all of the right decisions. And it took such a big weight off her shoulders. And because she wasn't a cyclist in the way that I was a cyclist, she was more like a commuter around town that wanted to go on a big bike trip. Our physical abilities were different as well. So putting us both on the one bike meant we could go 50% faster. It was completely ridiculous.
And I guess you're obviously the pilot on that tandem and she's the stoker, so she's sit at the back and you're navigating. I've often wondered when I've seen like motorcyclists, traveling pinion or even tandem riders, because I do have anxiety, and actually I would say that my anxiety is what put me to bike travel. I find it helps with my thoughts and stuff. But I've often thought, I'm not sure how I would go not being the one in control. Was that an experience for her in that on the tandem, automatically then she had so much trust in you that she was okay? Or I guess there's always a little bit of fear probably still left there, but as you're pushed into those situations, maybe that lessens a little bit?
Yeah, I don't actually ever remember her freaking out over something that I did. So I think the number one thing with a tandem is communication. You need to be able to tell the person behind you what you're doing at any moment. So whether it's making a turn or slowing down or changing gears or braking abruptly, the person at the back can brace themselves for whatever those situations are if you are constantly in dialogue.
Did you ever have like a tandem, like just a mishap, just a miscommunication mishap? Because it wasn't like you started that trip being a tandem rider, knowing that rhythm. Like there would have been a process of having to learn to ride the tandem together in a way as well.
Yeah, I think that probably only took 2 or 3 days before we got all of our processes dialed in. One thing that I do remember though is how cyclists are notorious for having like gigantic tree trunk legs and then scrawny upper bodies.
Yeah, yeah, T Rex arms.
So that was me back in 2012. And I remember when we got the tandem, because you need to balance the bike with your arms and upper body. For the first few weeks, my upper body was so fatigued from riding it, just trying to balance and turn and all of that sort of stuff. Yeah, something I did not consider when I got the tandem.
Oh my gosh, I can really appreciate that. Not from riding a tandem, but just whenever I've taken a cycle tour and I've got my panniers on my bike and I use fork mounts to put some gear on my front forks and stuff as well. And that thing's loaded. I'm not a super light traveller. I'm definitely not a weight weenie in that measure. But every now and then I've had to use like a train sometimes to navigate a section to get to where I'm going. And here in France, it's awesome. I can do that. Sometimes a bit stressful, but I really realise how useless my upper body strength is whenever I've had to like navigate train platforms with a loaded bike. Like, okay, this is 30 kilos and I'm really struggling here. So you might have ended up ripped then. Like, you must have biceps and stuff by the time you reached Australia.
Maybe a little bit. I think your body adapts just enough to be a good tandem rider, but it doesn't do anything more than that.
Have you ever ridden a tandem since that journey?
No, I haven't. So after that journey, I set out and just traveled by myself for, it must be like 7 or more years. So I didn't really have the opportunity to use the tandem. The tandem's sitting at my parents' house, so I could definitely take it out one day.
You so need to send me a picture of that tandem. I want to see it. It'd be hilarious if your parents still had the little blue cruiser with the long cranks. Big pedals.
Long gone.
Look, I could do a whole podcast, Alee, on that tandem journey. Europe to Australia, it's a huge distance. And sometimes I feel like this podcast normalises abnormal travel in a way. Like cycle touring those distances is not normal, but people tuning in all of a sudden, the cool thing is it becomes normal. But I want to get into more of the details of just your lifestyle. Like I said in the intro, like I mentioned 2012 as a bike nomad, but you're talking about first trips there, which were before that, I guess, as well. You call yourself a bicycle nomad. Was that a conscious decision you took to live your life this way, or has that sort of just naturally progressed and all of a sudden you realise that's actually what you've been doing?
So I guess it kind of starts in 2012 when I quit my job. I sold absolutely everything and I set out with my partner to do a 1.5 year trip between Europe and Australia. And that trip, we were loving it so much that it ended up being 2.5 years. And I'd say after that trip, I wasn't at the point where I consider myself a nomad at all. It was just that I did this amazing adventure that I really want to do more of it. And depending on what happened with our lives when we got home, that would determine whether we would do it a lot or a little. And so, unfortunately, my partner and I broke up just a few months later. And I guess fortunately as well, I started just experimenting with different types of bike travel to know what my favorite way to travel on a bike was going to be. So I was doing lots of trips on folding bikes and trips with trailers and like bikes with fat tires and mountain bike trips and all kinds of different stuff. A little bit different to the classic 4 pannier type setup that I'm still using today. But it probably wasn't until like a good 5 years in where I was like, I can do this sustainably for a long time. I feel comfortable with living an uncomfortable existence and being surrounded by completely new things every day and logistics that I don't even know how I manage most of the time.
Often with guests, I trawl through your social media history. And I mean, listeners, like I mentioned in the intro, you probably already know who Alee is. And if you're new to bike touring and you don't, you will very soon if you do a Google search, because CyclingAbout, the premier resource I honestly feel for travel in this space. But what that research does for me, Alee, is it shows me some insights into your thinking. And it reminds me of a quote which I wrote down, which was, I've long felt that when you live a predictable life, the future is already the past. You've already lived out many of your experiences. That's why I've chosen a vibrant existence that is mostly unplanned, very uncertain, full of surprises. Every day my life is full of twists and turns, all kinds of challenges, and both very pleasant and unpleasant experiences. I usually don't know who I'll meet, where I'll sleep, what I'll eat. It's not for everyone, but it certainly bodes well with my thirst for adventure. And every day I get a bit better at dealing with all the chaos. That really goes to the essence of your mindset. You yearn adventure, don't you? That unpredictability, the thought that if things are predictable, the future is already the past because it's the same.
Yeah, I know. It's a really crazy thing that I love just the idea of being able to push myself every single day. I love being exposed to new things and new ideas and keeping my mind just open and fresh constantly. Yeah, I have just been in Melbourne for the last month visiting family and friends. And although I absolutely loved the experience, I'm just craving the unpredictable nature of travel so much, even after more than a decade of doing it.
And that unpredictable nature of travel, there's an element where people take a bike tour and you don't know what's going to happen each and every day. That's the unpredictability of it. But for some people, they do know to a degree where they're going to be in a week's time, 2 days' time, what roads they're going to take and stuff like that. You strike me someone, Alee, who you don't take the fastest road. You definitely take the proverbial road less travelled. But the unpredictable nature, when you set out to see a country How much planning do you actually go into detail of before you set out? Like, are you researching these unknown tracks that you end up on, or are you more, I'm going to see what today brings and go the way that fate tells me to go, in a way?
It's kind of a bit of both. So, one of my favorite things to do is read a Lonely Planet guidebook. I know that this is something that people did 20 years ago and people don't do it anywhere near as much as today. But I think they genuinely give you the best overview of the history, the environment, the main places to see in each country, what the temperament of the people are, the different types of foods. So I kind of get this overarching idea of what a country is before I even arrive there. And then I kind of create routes that are off the beaten track just because I love being in quieter environments that are safer and there's more chance of seeing animals and all kinds of crazy plants. The camping is so much better when you're off the beaten track. There's fewer tourists. You tend to have more authentic experiences with local people. And I also figure if I've got a 3-month visa in a country that's small enough, I can go to so many different regions of that country and understand the country even more in depth if I take my time. So, yeah, then it comes to the route planning. So, I'm looking for like big mountains, large swaths of nature. I'm trying to connect up all of the main places that I think sound good in the Lonely Planet. And then the parts that are less planned is actually the day to day. So I'll have a route of what I think will be good, but that route is ever changing depending on the people that we meet, recommendations from locals, stuff we hear about along the way, and even just things like how we're feeling that day. We're not trying to make it to a particular town or village or even campsite at any moment. If we feel like doing 10 kilometers that day and we're exhausted from the day before, then we're not going to go any further than that. So, yeah, a lot of it is planned. And then I'd say it's like just the day to day and maybe like 2 or 3 days either side is much less planned.
Is taking that maximum time available to you in a country, you mentioned there, say you have a 30-day visa and you're in a small country. Some people would say, oh, I'm in a small country, I actually don't need 30 days here. It seems like you've almost flipped it to say, wow, I can totally maximise my experiences. How can I get the most out of this country? What's the most time? Have you always had that view to take as much time as possible in each country? Or is that something that's also evolved with your nomad lifestyle as well?
I think it's a bit of both. So, because I'm a nomad, I'm just not in a rush to be anywhere at any time. So, normally it is just the visa length that is the restriction on how much I can see in a country or what my route is going to be. I'd say for a lot of the world, you need to plan your trips around seasons because, especially the further you get from the equator or even on the equator itself, there are good seasons and there are bad seasons. So, when I'm traveling slowly through places, I'm also taking into context what the seasons are going to be doing as well, because I don't want to be stuck in southern Tasmania in winter when I can be in Queensland in winter where the temperatures are much more palatable.
I was just thinking, you've just come from Melbourne in winter. Have you ever actually twisted your family's arm to come and meet you somewhere in the world? Like, have you ever had people come to visit you as opposed to you going back to a cold winter in Melbourne?
Yeah, my parents have probably visited 3 or 4 times over the years to just whatever countries take their fancy. And my sister's come out and visited me a couple of times, and same with some of my friends. Other times, somebody that I know is going to be in a neighboring country, and so I'll change my plans just so that I can meet up with them in the next country. You work around people a little bit as well.
Can I ask, it's not to do with bike travel at all, but as an Aussie who's living away from Australia at the moment as well, to another Aussie who's not in Australia much at all, what do you seek the most, other than the obvious friends and family, when you do return back to Australia?
I really appreciate a good coffee.
Oh, I thought coffee would be there.
I genuinely think that Australia has the standard of coffee is just that step higher than any other country I've been to.
Mentally for me, I don't want to sound like a coffee snob, but I'm with you there. And I also have just had to change my mindset since living overseas. I don't want to be the Aussie coffee snob that refuses to drink coffee somewhere, but I've definitely changed my coffee style depending on where I'm drinking coffee. I would never order a milky coffee in France because, my goodness, if I tried to, it's probably going to come out with like a floating bit of chantilly cream or something. And I'm like, what is this monstrosity? But do you find you just take a different mindset, and then Australia is where you just look forward to a different style of coffee?
Yeah, I don't think I miss coffee from Australia, but it's just whenever I go there, I'm just like, damn, that's a good cup of coffee.
Listeners, I've been using the Cyc Plus AS2 Pro tiny e-pump inflator on my rides recently, and it's honestly been super, super handy. When I first got it, I was a little bit skeptical. Would I actually really ditch my hand pump for something electronic? But I have loved it. It's super small. It packs easily into my little saddlebag without weighing me down. And what I love the most is actually the tyre pressure gauge. It's great because I can see exactly what PSI I'm putting in, which comes in handy whether I'm fixing a puncture or actually doing rides which switch between dirt roads and tarmac. The unit takes about 30 minutes to fully charge, and a full charge will inflate my tyres 3 to 5 times, which is plenty enough for most rides. If you want to check it out, I've got a link in the podcast show notes to Cyc Plus, and Seek Travel Ride listeners get 5% off. Simply use the code STR. It's been a solid little gadget for me, and it's definitely on my pack list for my bikepacking adventures. Okay, now back to the episode. Yeah, I wonder if your caffeine intake goes up. You know what I'm thinking also, though, Ali, and this would definitely be a feature of, and the highlights of a lot of your travel you've taken, no doubt, are the beautiful people that you will have encountered in all the countries around the world through this travel and the hospitality of those people. And I wonder, it's an impossible tally to make, but I cannot even think of the countless cups of coffee and tea that you would have been offered up in all around the world by people in their houses as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in Saudi Arabia last year, and I think you've had a few guests that have gone through Saudi Arabia now, and the hospitality is just unbelievable there. So people just pull up in their cars, wave you down, and they're already holding this pot of coffee ready to pour you a cup. So yeah, it's just amazing how much tea and coffee you get to share, especially through Islamic countries. It's such a big part of their culture.
I feel one of the biggest benefits of hosting this and producing this podcast is I've learnt a lot about the world and been curious enough to now want to seek those places out myself. And Saudi Arabia is a place in point, and my perceptions of Saudi Arabia and what I believe Saudi Arabia to be are at counterpoints to every bike traveller that I've ever spoken to who's actually been there. I wonder then, Ali, with perceptions and travel, do you find that you have found a way to try and get rid of those perceptions before you enter a country? Because you said you research in a Lonely Planet book, but you would know now through travelling so slowly through a country just how different things are in reality to what we might read in a book, in an article, see in a news clip. How do you marry up your own perceptions of travelling through a country? Like, do you ever take stock of reflecting back of, wow, this is so different to what I thought it would be like?
Yeah, I think I try not to research countries one or two borders away because I like to focus all of my time and attention into learning the country that's coming up. But I think a lot of the perception is not so much what I read in a book, but it's through conversations with people that you meet on the other side of the fence. And a lot of the time, the perceptions are the next country is really dangerous, the people are horrible, the food sucks. It's just so negative. And after traveling for such a long time and crossing so many borders and having these same types of conversations, you quickly realize that you can't believe everything that everybody tells you and that you have to experience it yourself. And so I think combined with my experience of that and also just being shocked by how different some countries are than others, it allows you to keep a really open mind about your experience through the next country.
It's something that I've come across before, is that often the people that can give us the perception that a country is really dangerous is that neighbouring country. And I don't always like to highlight not great stuff. But conversely, have you ever had it where your perception's been totally skewed the other way, where you perceived a country to be amazing and went there and thought, oh, this actually hasn't hit the mark?
Yeah, so I think the most negative experience of a country I've ever had was Georgia. And this goes against almost all other travelers who go to Georgia, and it quickly becomes one of their top countries. But my partner at the time just had such a hard time dealing with men there who they just always went a step too far, whether it's kissing her on the neck or holding her hand or touching her inappropriately or whatever it was. We just got to the point where we couldn't trust so many different people, and it just took a really negative turn, our entire experience there. And it wasn't just one interaction, it just seemed to come one after the other after the other. And yeah, then other female travelers that have been there have not had a single problem. So I can't quite wrap my head around why we had such a negative experience there, but that's the only country I can think of where it kind of flipped the opposite way.
It also goes to show that everyone's experience is different. There's no copybook to cycle touring. I couldn't read Cycling About's website and go, that's it, I'm going to follow this itinerary, I'm going to have the same experience, because so much happens in bike travel that we could never replicate an experience. You couldn't replicate your own.
Yeah, I think there's also a negative feedback loop associated with it. So the more it happens, the more you withdraw, the more defensive you are, the more you question people. And when you don't have that big smile and that outgoing positivity, I think people sense that and change the way that they interact with you.
It's interesting, actually. A recent guest of the show, Valu Heinala, who's Finnish, he rode from Helsinki all the way to Singapore, and we were talking just about the language barriers sometimes with cycle touring and going through so many countries with different languages. You might be bilingual, multilingual, but you never learn them all, and how do you get by? And something he told me, which sort of I remembered with you saying that, is a smile is a universal language, and approaching someone with a smile, chances are often you might get a smile back, and it changes the perspective. Cycle touring, I think, gives people, especially ones that do it so in depth like you do, Alee, a real good introspective view of themselves and a self-awareness of themselves as well. And I imagine you have that. Have you ever pulled yourself up out of a negative feedback loop where you've just been traveling, not feeling it, but realizing you need to mentally feel it a bit better to experience the country properly?
I don't think so. I'm just always so enthusiastic and excited, and it takes a really, really big hit to knock that out of me. Yeah, I don't think I end up in any negative feedback loops other than that one experience in Georgia.
When we talk about big hits, I want to talk about the 24th of November 2018, selfishly for two reasons. One, because it's an event that occurred which I remember so distinctly following you on your social media channels at the time, and I think it was a significant event for you where you literally took a hit. If I recall correctly, I think you were definitely in South America. Was it Peru? You had a massive crash. Crash doesn't even seem to describe what you had correctly, right?
Yeah, so I was in a really, really remote part of Peru. I actually found this trail on satellite maps, and I worked out that if I did a few hundred kilometers of this trail, I could get from X city to Y city. And so, yeah, I set out on this big grand adventure. I had like a week of food. I was ready to go and ride the whole trail and have an amazing time. But a couple of days into that adventure, I was pushing my bike along a hiking trail along a ravine, and it had just started to be the wet season. So in the afternoon every day, there was crazy amounts of rain that would fall. And as I was pushing my bike along this trail, it wasn't actually raining, but I think that the rain had dislodged a lot of the dirt on the track. And so when I pushed my bike along this trail, the trail collapsed underneath me, just my body weight disintegrated the trail, and I ended up falling about 30 meters into a ravine. It wasn't a vertical fall at all, but it was pretty close to vertical for most of it. And then the last 8, 10, 12 meters was a vertical fall into the riverbed. And I just remember the whole thing happening in such slow motion. Like at the start, I had no idea what was going on because it just happened. There was absolutely no warning. But then I remember falling and trying to grab onto rocks and things all around me. And every time I'd grab onto something, it would come along with me for the fall. And yeah, I remember thinking, like, this is pretty much it. I'm not going to survive this fall because it's just too far down into the ravine. And then it turned out that I landed in like this silty clay riverbed. So I like landed in this really thick, soft mud. And I just could not believe that I didn't go unconscious. I didn't really hit my head. I remember using like my arms and feet to brace the fall. So I was like falling onto my back, but I had my limbs out. And yeah, first thing I did was pull out the GoPro, start recording. But I was in such a remote place and I had to get my bike out there and I needed medical attention. So I had to get my bike out of the river and like kind of put it up on the side of the ravine a little bit. But I knew that it couldn't be there for long because the afternoon rains were imminent. And so it was about a 5 kilometer hike out of the ravine to get help from a nearby village. And this village is just so far in the middle of nowhere. They saw this guy with like blood everywhere and a torn shirt. And I could barely walk at this point as well because I'd done so much damage to my rib cage. So all of the muscles in my rib cage, like front and back, had fully locked up. And I kind of walked like a robot.
It's not funny, but I've just got this picture.
Oh, yeah, it's so messed up how I would have been walking. I took a whole bunch of like young adults with me to get this bike out of the ravine. So it was another 5K hike back to the bike just to recover all of my gear. And luckily, I didn't need to go down into the ravine this time. They all like scurried down the mountainside to get the bike and stuff. And yeah, then we hiked back to their village. The only way into this village is on a motorbike, and it was about 100 kilometers from the nearest big town.
And your ribs are smashed.
My ribs were snapped. I thought I had broken my wrist at this stage because I just couldn't really move my hand without excruciating pain. And then the rains just came in, and the rain literally didn't stop for 7 days. And so I just stayed in this tiny, tiny little village in the middle of nowhere for a full week. And I obviously could have got evacuated if it was really, really desperate, but I figured that I didn't want to strain any resources and that I would be fine if I just waited a week with my injuries. And so a week went by. I became friends with absolutely everyone in this village. Everyone looked after me so incredibly. But then I had to get on the back of a bloody motorbike with a broken wrist, broken ribs, and to get to the nearest good road that wasn't like single track mountain bike type stuff, it was 6 hours. So I remember leaving, we left at midnight and it was a full moon. So I could see absolutely everything. That's how bright this moon was. And yeah, it was just 6 hours of incredibly excruciating pain. And then I got put in a pickup truck, and it wasn't like, here's your private truck, you'll be riding in this in comfort all the way. No, that was just the local bus. So they crammed about 10 people inside this car. And because we were in such a remote area of the mountains, there's like lots of corners and bumps and drops and all kinds of stuff on this road. And so people were like playing corners with me in the car and just like crushing my rib cage every time we turned left and right. And then so it would have been another 4 hours until I got to a bigger town. And then to get to a town that had a hospital was another 5 hours on a bus.
Oh my God, I've lost count of how many hours we've travelled here now.
Yeah, I think it was 15 hours.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Did you have any form of pain medication?
just the real basic stuff. If people have a medical issue in a village like this and they die, like there's not any way to get out. They don't have permanent doctors on hand to like deal out the right medication or do the right medical interventions. It's like such a stark reality when you fall into that situation and you realize just how little these guys have in the case of an accident.
Oh my goodness. Bear in mind, I know this story because I remember being captivated. I remember, Ali, I don't know you. This is the first time we've spoken together. But I remember like constantly trying to see, is there an update? Is there an update? What's happened? And I remember you'd updated, we've managed to get my bike. And I'm like, get your bike, but what about you? And I remember, and I'd encourage people to actually look at that video. I'm sure it still exists somewhere, probably on YouTube now.
Yeah, if you just search cycling about Peru, you'll come up with that video.
I think it's probably an example of what's the worst thing that could happen on a bike tour. You're in an isolated area. You've had a crash, which by all rights could possibly have killed you if you'd landed differently, not in that muddy, silty, sloppy river base. The fact that you could even stand and walk away to get to this village is amazing. But also, that's not the end of the story. You've still got to get yourself to medical attention. What happened when you finally got there, that 15, 16-hour journey? What happened next?
I got to a hostel and the hostel owner just like completely swept me under his wing. Because my Spanish wasn't particularly good at that stage, he went to hospital with me and yeah, we got everything checked out. Luckily, my injuries weren't super bad. So I did fracture something like 8 or 10 ribs.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it was like a mix of ribs at the front and ribs at the back. So, like, some ribs were fractured in two places. And I don't know if you've ever broken ribs, but it's
I
like
have, and it's
gotta be the
horrible.
worst thing ever. You can't laugh, you can't sneeze.
Getting up and out of a bed, that's the worst
Yeah,
thing for me. Like, and I never figured out how to do this. I only had like one rib broken at a time. I've done it twice. But you know that
yeah,
action of how to pull yourself upright and to lay yourself back? I never figured that out.
yeah.
Laughing. Oh my goodness.
You can't laugh.
No. I think I used to laugh in like an octave. So like, ah. Like,
Like, just a sensitive laugh.
yes, exactly. Can I ask you, there's so many things you could have been thinking there, and I'm sure you've had the how did I survive that thoughts, and then the how on earth will I survive this, and what am I going to do, and you know, the WTF moments that come with that as well. That type of situation is distinctly an event where you're at a crossroads of which way you want things to go. You've survived it, but also did that event, and even more broadly, just in general, have you ever actually looked at this lifestyle, this bicycle lifestyle, nomad lifestyle of yours, and actually questioned whether to continue in this way? And did that happen after this crash?
No, I think it just lit a bigger fire in the belly somehow.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing such a cool thing at the time, and it was such an unlikely event to have ever occurred. And so I kind of just looked at it really rationally, and I counted my lucky stars that it wasn't a worse thing at all. And I just went into full rehab mode. And I think it was about 5.5 weeks, and I was back on the bike already.
Yeah, I remember being stunned at how quickly you were back on the bike.
Yeah, I had to ride pretty gingerly for a while there. But I don't know if this is backed by medical advice, but I always feel like when I have an injury like that, when I am more active, I recover quicker. So if I like break my wrist or leg or whatever, like I try and use it as early as I feasibly can. And that seems to accelerate the recovery so much quicker. So even though I wasn't at 100% condition when I got back on the bike, it was like less than a week when I started feeling pretty good and was able to ride on sort of off-road trails again.
You had a long time off the bike in terms of being able to ride those type of trails again. Did you have any residual fear or new fears come about when you were there, or that wasn't even a thing at all? Like, did you find that you looked at single track a different way, a ravine a different way, or a trail a different way? Is there a fear loop that started, or not at all?
I think that I do consider the risks of riding on really steep trails a bit more now, but it's more just like, oh, I better not fall because I might die. It's kind of more in a almost a funny way rather than a I'm terrified way.
I need to channel your funny way because I'm always the other way. I've had some significant falls on my bike that are nothing like yours, and they unfortunately have put me into that fear loop. That's why I was interested to see what your reaction was. Another question I have for you then, and it's a question I get asked by many listeners, and sadly I don't actually have a full answer yet, is what about insurance? You spoke there that if worse came to worse, maybe you could have been evacuated out. Is there insurance actually available to you to take for someone who's travelling so extensively in this manner? Like, do you have travel insurance? Is there travel insurance a bike traveller can actually take, and or one that you would even recommend people look into?
Yeah, I've used a lot of different insurances over the years. And luckily, I haven't needed to make that many claims because things seem to always go pretty smoothly for me. I guess the things I claim most on is just camera equipment that I'll accidentally drop my camera and destroy a lens or whatever electronics decide to just give the ghost. So, in terms of like big medical expenses, I've never really had to claim them, but I know for sure that my insurance covers me up over 3,000 meters in elevation, and it includes big medical evacuations and stuff. I'm currently using Safety Wing, which is a subscription insurance, which seemed to work just fine for what I'm doing through Africa. But when I was in South America, I had a more comprehensive cover that kind of covered the big mountain stuff.
Yeah, because that's another limiter. Like sometimes it's the elevation that you're riding at can include or preclude you from an insurance cover. Sometimes it's the type of travel you're doing if you're on a dirt road. Sometimes it's for how long an amount of time you're traveling as well. And so it seems to be, I don't know that it's necessarily a barrier to entry, but there's no sort of straightforward. When you travel by bike, you can't just go travel insurance and buy any cover because it's not necessarily going to cover what you do.
Yeah, and the like big mountain stuff is always much more expensive because the risks are so much higher.
Can you remember what elevation you would have been at in Peru?
Could have been 4 or 4,500 meters.
I'm just even thinking how much that would have impacted on your injuries as well. Like being at that elevation has an extra strain on our bodies, right?
Well, I think by that stage, it had been like a year of cycling through the Andes Mountains. And so I'd been at an average elevation of like 3,000 meters by that point. So my body was actually pretty well conditioned for it. In fact, I remember getting a blood test because I travel as a vegan. So I was just interested whether the diet that I was eating through South America was affecting my bloods. And so I went to this doctor who took the bloods, and he's like, your iron levels are ridiculously high. And yeah, I started researching what it was when your iron levels are way too high. And there's like all kinds of crazy diseases where they need to extract like liters of blood from your body every week. But I was like, oh, I'm pretty worried about this finding because normally iron is a hard thing for a vegan to get.
Yeah.
And it turned out that because my body had acclimatized so well to high altitude environments, I had way more red blood cells than normal. And as a result, I had way more iron in my blood than normal. And so, even though I had like 3 or 5 times more iron than you should have in your blood, it was just completely normal with living at a really high altitude and exercising at that altitude.
If you could have slipped back into your pre-touring and I think you mentioned racing bikes or something like that. Imagine going to sea level at that level. You would have been at the local crit. Just
That's another thing that the doctor said. He was like, have you heard of people in the Tour de France blood doping? And I was like, yeah, I have. I actually follow the Tour de France. And he's like, what you have done is naturally blood doped by being at altitude.
yellow jersey hill climber. You didn't, and doing all that with a loaded bike too, by the way.
That's right.
Alee, you mentioned it that you do travel as a vegan. I've interviewed a few vegan guests before and also vegetarians, and something that has come up, because I do often talk about food on the show, is sometimes it's harder to be able to sustain that choice in a diet through different countries. I'd love to know, how have you found travelling as a vegan for as long as you have been vegan for in this manner?
Yeah, I think that traveling as a vegan is much, much, much easier than what you'd think. And part of the reason why is because a lot of the staple foods in any country are just vegan by default. People are eating basic grains, they're eating beans, they're growing vegetables in their gardens, they're making breads. A lot of diets in a lot of countries, the foundation is completely vegan just by default. And especially in places like Africa, people don't have access to meat because they don't have money to buy meat. And meat is just like something that you eat as a special occasion. So I think just having that as the basis of your understanding means that you can find vegan foods anywhere you go. I do actually carry more food than most people. And that's just based on a risk analysis that I do in my brain, where I'm like, this is a tiny, tiny town. Are they going to have oats that I like eating every morning? Are they going to have nuts and dried seeds? And are they going to have vegetables? So I do tend to be on the more cautious side because I do want to be able to maintain being vegan. But yeah, I'd say the hardest countries that I've traveled as a vegan are the stands. So between Turkmenistan and Pakistan, just because they don't grow a lot of vegetables through that region. I remember just eating so many onions and tomatoes and a few potatoes here and there, but it got pretty grim. But one thing I want to mention is that you don't have to be perfect as a vegan. So what I like to do is, if somebody doesn't realize you're vegan and they make you a pizza and it has cheese on it or whatever, I still eat it. I don't, yeah, I don't make being a vegan such a big barrier that it affects personal relationships with people. And if I'm staying with somebody, I make sure if it's through warm showers, I'll mention it in my profile. Or if somebody invites me somewhere, I'll just mention what I do and don't eat to them as soon as I think food might be involved. And the other thing is, you don't have to have a perfect diet every day. People survive on bread for their meals, every meal for 2 weeks in a row, and they don't drop dead. So the way I tend to think of it is, if my diet isn't perfectly optimized for a few days here and there, when I get to a big enough town where I can get the right vegetable and bean and lentil uptake, that's where I make up for it.
That makes sense when you spell it out like that as well. And going in with the mindset that it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't even need to be the full nutrition level day after day. Realizing that there will be moments where it's not going to be possible, or where you're going to be eating really simply, but you'll still be able to eat. I think that's an important thing as well. I'm guessing you're vegan also because of a love of animals and wildlife too, I imagine. This is an assumption on my part. I know through following you that you are a huge animal lover. I'd love to hear some wildlife stories. A lot of people travel through a country to experience the culture, the views, the terrain. I imagine you would add wildlife up there on your list of things you want to experience when you're traveling in areas as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess becoming a vegan was a large part because of the bike touring I was doing and just seeing the way that animals were raised and transported. It was so confronting that I just knew that I couldn't eat meat and drink milk and be involved in that system anymore. So it felt like quite an easy decision. And I am certain that it's something that I'll be able to maintain for the rest of my life. But I've always been passionate about animals, whether it's having pets, whether it is like going on walks with my family and seeing native animals in Australia, or going to another country and, seeing the orangutans or whatever it is. It's always been something that has fascinated me. And I guess because we tend to travel the road less traveled, that exposes me to a lot more wildlife than normal. So we see a lot every single day, lots and lots of birds, quite a lot of small mammals. Africa has been incredible to us. We've gone on safaris at almost every opportunity. And I think one of the highlights was camping in Eswatini, which is formerly known as Swaziland. We were at a nature reserve there. And when we woke up in the morning, there were 10 rhinos sleeping next to our tent.
Whoa!
They were just sitting on their sides, like sleeping right next to our tent. And just to be in the presence of an animal that big, that dangerous, that majestic, that rare, it really took my breath away. It was, yeah, an amazing experience.
I realise I'm going to sound so ignorant saying this out loud, but rhinos to me, all I know about them is how rare they are and how endangered they are. I'm going to sound so stupid. The thought that you'd even see 10 together would blow my mind, let alone next to your tent.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that allowed this to happen. So the first thing was we were camped near a watering hole, and because there wasn't a lot of rain, that meant that a lot of animals have to congregate at the same watering hole. So it gives you a really good chance to see animals, especially in the morning and at night. And then the other thing was this is a nature reserve that has big fences all around. So the animals are essentially captive there. And that means that they can't roam far and wide. They pretty much have that watering hole. So, yeah.
Can I ask a question? It seems like a selfish question, but it's very relevant to me recently. So I have biked to it a lot, but I've not wild camped a lot, and it's something I really want to do. And I have a good friend who lives close by who just wants to get into camping in general. So just recently, we went on an overnight hike here in the Pyrenees to camp wild, and we did everything awesome, set up our tents, had the beautiful views, flat ground, everything fine, making dinner, and then all of a sudden, because it is, summer in the Pyrenees, we had a herd of 30 cows come through. And cows are not aggressive. I was not worried about them wanting to be aggressive to me. Some of them did have calves, and I know that mothers can be very protective of that. So I was aware of that, and I wasn't going up to them, but they were definitely coming up to us. We both ended up taking refuge in a hut which was right nearby, and then hilariously the cows are all looking through this little crack in the stone window looking at us, and then they started licking our tent. They nearly trampled our tent, and then we both made the decision, I'm not sure we should be camping if there's cows around, because what if they accidentally walk over our tent in the night? So we hilariously set up our tent in this tiny, tiny little hut, which, maybe people who do this maybe you would have just set up in the hut in the first place, I'm not sure, right? But often a tent can be more comfortable than a hut. It wasn't like a luxury place, right? Can I ask, with the rhinos, did you have like a fence? That sounds silly to ask if you had a fence around you, but what advice would you have for people like me who really want to do this, but my environment in the perfect time to do this is surrounded by wildlife that I'm scared that these cows are huge, they're like half a ton each, could accidentally walk over me. Not intentionally, but they're not aware of their size. They don't know what they can do to poor little me in my little nylon tent. What should I do? Is there something I can do? Am I right to be scared?
I feel like you're underestimating cows. Cows, they walk around at night and they probably don't walk into trees constantly. So
I think that as well.
the cow to walk over your tent, I feel like pretty low chance.
All right. So you wouldn't even think twice of camping somewhere with a herd of cows around then.
I'd probably go and start picking grass and feeding the cows.
Okay, all right. Well, I feel like I can take your advice on board. I don't know whether when I set my tent up, I'll fully be not scared when I hear them all around. Because something I did learn, which is new to me, is I feel like they never sleep. Because they were around all the time.
A lot of herbivorous animals, they have to eat like 18 hours per day. So, yeah, when they're not eating, they're sleeping.
Yeah, okay. And then they're eating. Actually, hilariously, just to finish off this story. So we camped in the hut, and then all through the night, the cows were just around us and heard this noise, which thankfully we knew was a cow before it was asleep. And they just used the hut roof to just scratch their itches and stuff. So we had this symphony of cows just like tapping on the roof all night. It was quite funny. What an experience. Okay, cows is one thing, but there would be animals that you are a bit more wary of,
Yeah.
especially now when we are talking about Africa. I'm thinking elephants, stuff like that. I was speaking with Steph Devery a few months ago. She had a crazy story of a group of lions surrounding her tent. What about yourself there? Like, what precautions do you take in certain situations?
Yeah. So, I guess the first thing you need to know about African wildlife in particular is that most of the hunting is at night. So, it's actually quite rare that animals are in danger during the day from predators. It's like maybe an hour before sunset and an hour after sunrise where you do need to be careful. And so the kinds of precautions we take are cooking not at our tent. So we might cook 50 or 100 meters away from our tent so that if there are any smells that we drop on the ground, it's not going to attract wildlife to our tent. We also make sure we stay in the tent all night. So once you pee, don't pee until the next morning. Um,
Okay.
if there are animals like a lion or a leopard or something around, they're very opportunistic. And if you just like happen to get out of your tent and you're 20 meters away from the lion, that's not a good thing. You don't want that. The other thing that you really need to keep on your mind is that humans are not the typical food of a predator, like a predator animal. They would much, much, much rather eat a gazelle or any other form of small mammal rather than a human. Like just wearing clothes, for example, is like a lion's going to treat you differently than something that they've evolved to eat over 20 or 30 million years. So, yeah, I think there are enough precautions you can take to actually be quite safe. And like in Steph's situation, the best possible thing you can do is just remain completely silent. The lions are not trying to hunt you down. They're probably communicating, if anything. And although it's really, really terrifying, the chances that you're going to survive are ridiculously high. I don't think you're in as much danger as you think.
Yeah, it sort of goes back to that whole internal thought process that some of us get into if we are in a wild camp. Like everything, like you question every noise because you're never out there to hear the noises, and all of a sudden the noises are new. If I recall correct, well, I do recall correctly, Steph said she just laid perfectly still, breathing really silently as well, did not move and minch while they're talking to each other as well, and, got up, packed up really early, and then set off. Have you had that situation in Africa? I don't want to make this sound like it's a cliche you're going to bike tour in Africa and you're going to have a tent surrounded by lions. I don't think that's the case. Have you had anything that's given you pause for concern, or a situation where you go, wow, that was unreal, that happened? Waking up to rhinos is obviously really rare.
Yeah, the rhinos is definitely right up there for bizarre experiences. We have heard lions at night. Lions, when they roar, you can hear them at least 10 kilometers away. Like, it's such a ridiculously loud sound. And having been on safaris and been next to lions while they're roaring, the vibrations that they put out, they go through your body. Like your whole body shakes when a lion roars next to you. It's like such an unbelievable noise. We've had giraffes around our tent. We've had elephants nearby. I'd say most of the close animal interactions with our tent we probably don't see. So, we've seen leopard footprints near our tent the next morning, but yeah, we just haven't actually seen a lot of the animals that would be roaming around.
Have you actually ever set yourself up to try and see something like that, like what naturally is happening at night? Just you are an animal lover, you've gone on safaris and stuff. Have you ever tried and see the nocturnal world happen?
Yeah, so I go on night walks all the time. I just get my headlamp, it's quite a few hundred lumens, and I just look up into the trees. And one of my new favorite animals is called a bush baby.
What is this?
It's like a tiny, tiny, tiny monkey, but it's really, really fluffy and it's got gigantic eyes because it only goes out at night. And it's probably about as big as your hand. Your hand could be a bed for a bush baby. And they basically just run through the treetops. And so there's been quite a few occasions now where I've just gone for a bit of a night walk and I've seen these bush babies like running through the trees. They're so cool.
My goodness. And bush babies, is that something that you learned about when you were in country, or is that something Lonely Planet guide told you, or you're an animal lover and you're researching animals of a country? Like, I'm just picturing them with their big eyes, by the way.
Yeah, definitely look up a picture because well there's a really really cute one and then there's a kind of ugly one.
Bit like drop bears and koalas, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, I'd definitely seen pictures of them before. I'm sure I'd seen them in a David Attenborough nature documentary. But when I saw my first one, it's not an animal that I ever thought I'd see. They only come out at night and they're that small. I didn't think they'd be that common. But having spoken to people, some people have them living in their roof or just in the trees in their backyard. It's kind of like, it's not an uncommon animal.
Hey there, adventurers. Are you loving the stories on Seek Travel Ride? If so, you can help the podcast wheels turning, literally. Head to the link in the show notes and buy me a coffee. Every coffee fuels this podcast, supports incredible guest stories, and keeps the adventure alive. So go ahead, click the link in the show notes, grab me a virtual brew, and let's ride on together. I feel when we were talking about wild camping there wouldn't be many people that have possibly wild camped longer than you. You're in a very small subset in terms of wild camping as well. I want to go really daftly superficial here, Alee, and ask you for your most bizarre wild camp setup that you can just think of on the top of your mind, like a place where you set up and thought, I can't believe I camped there.
Ooh, I mean, there's so many. Yeah, I've camped in caves and on cliff tops and in jungles and next to animals. And yeah, there's nothing that's like really standing out in my head right now. But we pay for campsites maybe 10 times a year. It's like such an infrequent thing. And I'd say we're camping at least 150 nights otherwise. And that's all wild camping. And I guess the best advice I can give if you're thinking of wild camping yourself is to camp as the sun's going down. I know that's quite hard in some countries when you've got really long days during summer, but having the veil of darkness just means that you're hidden straight away and you don't have to worry about getting found or discovered in the middle of the night. I also try my best to just be as far away from people as possible, but sometimes that's not the case. So in Mozambique, for example, we found it really hard to wild camp, but we still did it. And we basically just looked at a satellite map for like a really tight group of trees. And then once we got to that group of trees, we waited for it to get dark enough and for people to be just far enough away from the road that they couldn't see what we were about to do. And then we just like sprinted into the trees and wild camped. So you can do it anywhere. Normally, if I get found when I'm setting up a tent, I'll pack everything up and I'll go to another place because I just hate the idea that somebody knows that I'm camping somewhere. And even though I think it's a really low chance they might do something, they might go down to the local pub that night and tell the drunk guy that there's two people camping in the park, and then drunk people aren't thinking as straight as they should be. And so I just don't want to have that concern at all.
That's actually a really good insight and advice. I think it was Helen Dainty, and she's a fellow bike nomad as well. She mentioned with wild camping, you either want to be somewhere where nobody knows you're there or everybody knows you're there. In most scenarios, you don't want anyone to know that you're camping, but there might be scenarios where that's not possible, in which case you want to be really visible so that from that perspective as well. Would you agree with that type of insight too?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is if you are going to camp and be really visible, just ask for permission, because there's so few times in my life where I've asked to camp somewhere and somebody said no. It's exceedingly rare. And I don't love the idea of being visible just because I feel a little bit more vulnerable. Also, people come up to your tent and want to talk to you. And if you've had a long day on the bike or you're trying to make your breakfast or something and somebody has 1,000 questions, it can be overwhelming in the morning. But yeah, if you ask, there's a 99.99% chance you can sleep at that school or behind somebody's house or at a fire station or behind a telecommunications tower, or there's so many different ways you can camp, so many different places you can camp.
There is an element that wild camping suits this type of lifestyle very well because of the unplanned nature of your days. You don't know where you're going to end up sometimes, so being able to set up your home where you do end up is obviously an important element of that. But I get the feel from your adventure sense as well, like camping something you enjoy.
Definitely, yeah. I love falling asleep to the sounds of nature. I love that I can set up in like 30 minutes and pack up in 30 minutes. I love that, coming back to that unpredictability, like having no idea when I wake up in the morning where I'm going to sleep is just weirdly rewarding to me. I love the flexibility that it offers. I love that I'm disconnected from the internet and I don't have access to like comforts, like being able to charge something. Yeah, I just love living more simply.
If I was to talk to you then about equipment, and I don't often do this on my podcast because I often really like to focus on the human element, the human experiences behind people taking these journeys. But equipment is something that's really apt to talk to you about, Alee, because Alee, you are an amazing gear reviewer of equipment. Like you live this life, but you have also dedicated a good portion of your life to really undertaking the most thorough gear reviews I've known, especially in the bike touring world, bike equipment space. And you post these reviews and you post really lengthy articles about them as well. Reflecting back on the start of your journey to now, what's changed the most in your equipment from setting off, and what do you seek out personally? Like if we were talking about wild camping, what sort of equipment are you recommending to a full novice to sort of look at? Not the top level, but someone getting started with this side of things.
My equipment really hasn't changed that much since the start. I started out with panniers because they're waterproof. You can take them off your bike really easily. They're really easy to organize. Yeah, I just think panniers are the most practical way to travel on a bike. And so I started out in 2008 with a set of Ortlieb panniers, and I'm still using Ortlieb panniers to this day. So I think panniers are awesome. I think the best possible equipment that any rider should think about are the touch points on the bike. So having grips and gloves that are comfortable, having a bike that fits is important. Having a seat that gels well with you is really good. And same with the pedals. Having either flat pedals that are really grippy that you can move your feet around on a little bit, or being clipped in. Yeah, I think the touch points are the ones you really need to focus on. And then the next things that I think about are reliable equipment. So if you're setting out for a multi-year journey, you want to have stuff that just doesn't break down and doesn't require much maintenance at all. So I personally use roll-off hubs, which are an internal gear hub in the back wheel that has 14 different gears, and all of these gears are in an oil bath, and all the maintenance you need to do is changing the oil every 5,000 kilometers, and it's quite an easy process too. So yeah, I love using a roll-off internal hub. I love having a dynamo hub for lights. Again, not an essential at all, but it's just really nice to always know you can just flick your lights on and off. You don't have to charge batteries or any of that sort of stuff. And then comfort is the other thing that I generally look at quite closely. So, one thing I've really got into in the last few years that I didn't use at the start is a suspension stem and a suspension seat post. Both of those things don't require any maintenance because they don't have really complex oil dampers or anything. It's normally just a steel spring or a small elastomer spring. And it just takes out a lot of the vibration that come up from the ground. And at the end of the day, you feel fresher and you can ride on more technical terrain, and you don't get like numb hands and a sore butt. They're pretty amazing.
Yeah, and as you said, the importance of making sure that the touch points on the bike are comfortable for you as well is critical. I think you have a set of handlebars named after you now, don't you?
Yeah, I designed some handlebars with Koga bikes. So they're called the Koga Denham bar. And they're designed exactly for me. So they're perfect for me. And depending on what your needs are, they might be perfect for you too. But they're basically a swept back handlebar so that you sit more upright on your bike. The grip angle it's like angled back. So it's a little bit more ergonomic for your wrists when you're in an upright riding position. But then it's also got what are known as bull horns welded to the front of the handlebar. And the bull horns are designed to mimic what it's like being in the hoods of a drop handlebar. So you kind of get the best of a drop bar, which is like a more aerodynamic shape, like a more aerodynamic body shape, as well as like an extra hand position. But then you get the better bike control and handling of a wide flat bar, but then you also get put in a more upright riding position, which tends to be more comfortable if you ride as much as I do.
Can I ask, with bike seats, and gosh, I've gone down equipment rabbit hole here, are you someone that rides with a chamois or not a chamois at all? Because this is something else that blows my mind, and it's probably coming from, someone who was a cycling enthusiast and, rode a road bike for ages. The idea of not wearing a chamois on a ride, I can ride many hours, but I just, maybe I haven't found the right seat. Maybe I need to persevere longer. Like, what about yourself?
So I used a chamois until about 2.5 years ago. And during COVID, I wasn't able to travel. So I decided to like play around with the seats because I could, order a seat, test it out. If it didn't work, I could send it back. I had a base that I was working from. And through that process, I found a seat that instead of having the padding on your body in the form of a chamois, it was a more padded saddle that had the same shape as my old seat. And so all I essentially did was move the padding to the seat rather than my shorts. And it was just as comfortable as riding with padded shorts, except when you stopped, having a bit more airflow through there just kept you a lot drier. And so, yeah, it's entirely possible to ride without a chamois if you have the right seat, if it's a little bit more padded than normal. You don't want to be looking for like a really thin road bike or thin mountain bike saddle. It does need to have a little bit of cushioning on it. And that's one reason why people like Brooks saddles, because the saddle itself actually has vertical flex built into it. So it's kind of, the leather ones are almost like a hammock. That's what keeps people comfortable. It's the shape and the suppleness of the seat rather than the padded shorts.
It has always struck me that, padded shorts, it's adding the padding there. I've often wondered, though, is the chamois helping you, like, stay dry as well, and so there's less moisture there to create like a friction or a chafing spot. But then on the other perspective, perhaps the chamois is trapping the moisture as well because it's collecting it, and then you're staying more moist too. This is a personal journey I want to go on, so I do need to update my saddle, and I'm very tempted to just persevere. I guess the concern that I have is, again, coming from my background, it took me ages to find a saddle that would work for me. And so it's like I now need to go on the journey, which it sounds like you went on, of trial and error and seeing what works for you as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Brooks saddle is like oh my gosh, and well, I guess whatever brand it ends up being, it's a personal thing, isn't it? Find what works for you is what I'm hearing from you most.
Yeah, my partner Laura just used a Brooks saddle for 1,000 kilometers because she was having problems with her old seat, and she could not get used to a Brooks. So it's not like a Brooks is some magic saddle that will work for everybody. It's the same as any other saddle. You've just got to narrow down your options to a shape that you know works for you. So in your case, there might be a version of the saddle that you use that has a little bit more padding on it, which will allow you to ride without your padded short.
I'm glad you brought Laura said up there when her experience with Brooks saddles, because I've heard that you actually need a good period of kilometres on a saddle to break a Brooks saddle in, and so it will be uncomfortable for the first little bit and just grin and bear it, but then it'll get better. But maybe that's actually a misnomer. That's not the case at all.
So the Brooks saddles definitely break in because your body weight stretches either the leather, or they've got a special synthetic material these days they use in the sea line saddles. But yeah, the Brooks saddles, they will shape to your butt eventually, but that doesn't guarantee that it's going to be a perfect match for your butt either.
Again, back to you. It has to be the right saddle choice for you, not for everyone. Everyone's unique down there. So it's a journey we've all got to go on if we want to quit the chamois.
Yeah.
I mentioned your partner Laura there, and it's really apt to say, I mean, your current plans is touring through Africa, and in the proper Alee Denham style, you're doing it over 5 years, or maybe that'll be longer, who knows, right? But you are doing this with your partner, and you have previously toured with a partner, but you've also previously toured alone as well. And I'd love to get your reflections on that experience because, again, they're contrasting on your own and with a partner. I'm not saying like there's similarities with touring that would be the same for either, but obviously there's key differences there. I'd love to hear some insights about your experiences with both.
Yeah. So this is something I often think about, like which is better, cycling by yourself or cycling with somebody else? And ultimately, I'm just on the fence. There are pros and cons to both. I absolutely love traveling with Laura. A lot of it is just because you get to share experiences. And I just think that when you can share an experience and like draw upon that and reflect upon things that have happened, it's just such a special thing. So I love sharing experiences. There's so many logistics involved with travel, and to be able to like share those tasks is a really nice thing when you're traveling with somebody else. And when I'm traveling with somebody else, I also think that they balance me out a little bit better because I've got things that I like and things that I don't like and ways of doing things. And if I was left to my own devices, then I'll go down these rabbit holes where, I might work too much, or I might not appreciate a city because I haven't noticed something about it. So, yeah, I think traveling with somebody else just really balances you out a lot unless they're exactly like you are. In terms of traveling alone, I also love that partly because you can cater the trip to your every needs. So that's kind of a twist on the last bit of traveling with the partner. And that means that if you're just not feeling it, you don't have to ride. Or if you want to ride 100Ks instead of 50Ks, you can do that. You kind of have the ultimate flexibility when you're by yourself. I also find that I read so many books and listen to so many podcasts when I'm by myself, but you can kind of rely on the other person for entertainment when you're traveling with them. So I just listen to 10% of what I would when I'm solo traveling. And then in terms of video content, I feel like I love making films by myself so much more than when I'm with somebody else. And that's just because I can stop all the time and take as much time I need to get shots and, do different takes and set up my tripod on things. And I also view video making as a way to share my experience in the same way that I share an experience with Laura. So I'll put a lot of effort into creating a scene in a video that I want to remember forever, just so that I can remember it. So video making, it's a little bit for me as well. Like I love sharing my content, but I also love the memories involved with recording things.
I really love that. It hasn't struck me that you also make the videos for yourself, but of course you do. Like, I've made a few videos, nothing like yours, Ali, but I do a lot more photography because photography is what I really love. And if I think about it, it's similar. I often take the photos so that it takes me back to the moment. It's not necessarily for others, it's for myself as well. It's interesting there. It's like you said, there's pros and cons of both. And by the sounds of it, it's not like you would ever have to choose one over the other. And I'm certainly not going to hold you at gunpoint and say, choose one or else. But it's also great to know that you've been able to experience both as well. Do you think also, when I mentioned your current plans is to travel with Laura through Africa for 5 years, do you think there'll be periods of that travel where you might both just decide to take a few months solo?
We've discussed this pretty frequently, and so I was just home in Australia for the last month, and Laura took that opportunity to visit her friends and family for a month. And it kind of just works out that about every year, we each have things that we want to do for a few weeks. So in my case, it might be I want to catch up on some work, and Laura might have a friend fly out to a country that we're like in or near, and she'll just travel with her friend for a little while I'm making movies. So yeah, we're just completely open to it if that's what we need, but it kind of just works out that we have space apart every now and then just anyway.
That's beautiful. Can I say I recently watched the YouTube video you put out about your experience traveling with Laura through Saudi Arabia, and it was really nice to see both of your experiences sort of showcased in that as well. So it's interesting hearing your thoughts on, the videographer side of you of what you're looking to capture, but it's also now being able to capture that side of the experience too. And I guess also the perspective of a female traveller travelling in these things too, and being able to get Laura's insights into it as well. It's one of those things I've really tried to showcase on this podcast is the experiences of women, because the more women that are showcased, the more women will hear it and will try and do it themselves as well. We are still a small percentage of bike travellers that you and Laura no doubt have most likely seen on your travels as well, right?
Yeah, so solo woman travelers are pretty rare. I think in the last 2.5 years that I've been traveling with Laura, we've only met 4 or 5 of them. And guess where they all were? Saudi Arabia. It's like the last place on earth you would have expected that all of these solo women travelers were in Saudi Arabia, but here we were. And Steph was one of those people.
I wonder, did you meet Helen in Saudi as well? Because I think Helen travelled in Saudi just before Steph did.
Yeah. Yeah, we met just as she was exiting the country. And we met Steph maybe 10 days later after we met Helen. And we were in a city called Alula, which is kind of a tourism hotspot. So if you were going to meet a whole bunch of travelers, that's where it would be. But yeah, it just so happened that there were other solo women travelers there.
That's so quirky. When we talk about countries there, Ali, one of the great videos that you did put up was related to a survey that you did of bike travellers, and it was like the top 10 countries to travel to or to go bike travelling in. And I think from memory, you surveyed 150 bike travellers who travelled all around the world and asked them to rank their top 3, and then the percentages from that made the top 10 list. I'm sort of conscious that time has passed since you made that video, and I sort of want to ask you your own personal thoughts, especially now having some experience travelling through Africa. What would make your top 3?
That's such an unbelievably difficult question.
I ask the hard ones on the show.
I can narrow it down a fair bit though. So I think Japan is like an absolute wonderland for bike travel. And part of it is the culture. Japanese people just have their own way of doing absolutely everything, and learning about how they go about all of their different processes and things they've automated in their lives or services they've created. One quirky example is if you feel a bit lonely, you can go to a place where somebody will give you hugs. That's a service that you can pay for. Somebody will just hug you and talk to you.
How nice is that as a concept?
Nice, but it's also logical. Like, imagine you're away from somebody or whatever. Like, you can just go and get that service, and that kind of service extrapolates to everything in Japan. So I just think Japan is like fascinating culturally. It's also incredibly beautiful. They're very, very traditional people. So there's a lot of like customs and traditions you can learn about. It's still thoroughly modern. The food is incredible. And the island of Hokkaido on the north is quite wild as well. So if you want like a little bit more of a wild experience, you can go right up into the north as well. From a hospitality standpoint, I think Iran and Saudi Arabia are both on par. And both of them are fascinating culturally, historically, in all other ways as well. But it's really the hospitality that stands out in both of them. I think Mexico is a highly underrated country. Mexico is huge. Like, people don't realize how big it is because it's a little bit closer to the equator. But you can go on a 5-hour internal flight in Mexico. That's how big it is, which is the equivalent of crossing Australia.
Yeah.
So people don't realize its size, firstly. And because it's so big, that means they've got all kinds of different environments, and the cultures change and the foods change state to state and the traditions change. There's a mix of indigenous people as well as like more, they've been there for 400 or 500 years, but like people from a European background. Amazing festivals, amazing food. I think Mexico gets a little bit of a bad rap in terms of its danger, but danger tends to be very, very localized in certain areas. And so as long as you are talking to local people and reading guides, you can avoid any of the dangerous sides of Mexico quite easily. Another country that stands out is Peru. Peru is basically just one giant adventure wonderland. They've got everything from massive deserts to high altitude plains to the highest mountains in the Andes mountain chain to the Amazon rainforest. The Inca culture is incredible to learn about. Peru easily has the best food in South America by like a factor of 2 or 3. The people are super, super friendly compared to some of the neighboring countries. Yeah, I think Peru, if you're into adventure, Peru is like, should be the top of your list. And I think Kyrgyzstan kind of ranks up with Peru for the exact same reasons. So incredible nature, incredible camping, people on horseback, mountain lakes, snow, ice, fascinating culture, learning about the nomadic people there who basically go up into the mountains to raise cattle in the summer and then move into the valleys in winter where it's minus 30 or minus 40 up in the mountains. Yeah, just adventure wonderland for Kyrgyzstan. How did I go?
Well, you managed to get 5 instead of 3, but I'm going to allow it because it is an impossible question. Like, what? Yeah. It brings me, and I realize, wow, we've talked for so long. I could do a whole season with you and talk about different things, no doubt. But I really want to know your thoughts on this as well. Is you've traveled for so long, you've seen so much. There is still so much of this world you haven't seen, and you get excited about the idea of being able to see it, right? But what's the biggest takeaways that you have had from doing this for so long? Like, what has it taught you, not just of yourself, but of the world in general?
I think the world, by and large, is so much safer than you can possibly imagine. So it kind of makes sense why we are a little bit scared of the outside world. The news is so highly skewed to being negative because that's what people click on. And so if you read the news, you would think that the world's on fire everywhere, that everywhere's dangerous, and that Chinese people are like this, or people who live in Ethiopia are like this. But ultimately, humans are all the same. We all want to love. We're all very, very kind. We're all very generous. We all want to be part of a community. We all want to be loved and accepted. We want to be valued in society. Like, there are so many fundamentals about humans that are constant, no matter if you're living in a remote tribal area of the Congo or whether you live in New York City. It's, yeah, the fundamentals of humans are the same. Yeah, I'm going to go with those two things as like the world is safe and humans are really similar everywhere you go.
I love that. The world is safe and humans are the same. And kind, happy, loving. I love this. I love everything about it so far. It's great insights to share.
Yeah, I think people just don't realize because you need to be exposed to it like multiple times per country in all kinds of different countries to have that overwhelming sense. So yeah, I'm glad that I can go to, hundreds of countries and be able to share that with people.
In terms of sharing that with people, you are doing this. As I've mentioned a few times in the show, Alee, you do thorough gear reviews. You also produce amazing information videos about this space. You have a great website. If people want to go down the rabbit hole and discover more about you and have all this information at their fingertips, everyone, it's pretty easy. Cycling About. Put it into Google, Cycling About. You'll come up with every form of Alee there, learn more about him and see all the incredible places as well. How is it making content when you're so involved in touring through places? Because I do get the feel that you are focused on your touring when you are in country. So that time away that you mentioned of in Melbourne, catching up with family and friends, is that primarily when you're producing a lot of this long form stuff for us to digest?
I think my brain is constantly like churning cogs no matter wherever I am. Like, I'm always thinking about gear and experiences and things I want to document. So I kind of squeeze it in throughout the day. Like, I got a notes app and I'll just like write down stuff that I'm thinking about at that time. But I think also people think that we just ride all day, every day, 365 days a year. But I'd say that we ride about 50% of all days. And the other days are either visiting things, meeting people, taking rest days because our bodies are getting weary. And part of that is creating content. So I'll open my laptop probably 3 days a week and just be writing and creating and updating old resources and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love hearing that side of it as well, in that, and also, getting rid of that misnomer that when you're on a cycle tour, all you're doing is riding your bike from place to place. Because you are taking time in places to see them properly, and a lot of that does not involve riding a bike through them, obviously.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of our time is like, there are really simple things that we get a lot of enjoyment out of, like just going to a supermarket for the first time in a new country. Incredible experience. Like, just seeing what different things people eat and what they buy in supermarkets is fascinating. On our rest days, we just like chat to people in the streets. We stand out like sore thumbs almost everywhere we go. And so people come up to you if they know a little bit of English and they'll start a conversation, and you just never know where that's going to lead. Oftentimes you'll share food with them or might even get invited to their house.
And again, that's the unplanned part, which really comes front of mind of the adventure for you as well, isn't it? You can't plan those type of interactions with people. It's serendipity when it occurs, and you just have to take it on when it comes your way as well. Alee, I'm going to ask you a question which I now ask my guests to share. I feel this is extra impossible for you, but I still ask it anyway. And that is, I want you to describe one day of your trip. It can be any day from any trip from any country. You've got, over 12 years of days to choose from. You might use the recency bias and pick a day in Africa, or maybe not. But I just want you to take me and the listeners there and tell us about what happened on this day.
All right. I'm going to go with a day in Namibia, because this part of Namibia, so few people will have ever traveled through or even considered traveling through. So it's up in the far northwest of the country. It's called the Cauco Land, and it is completely inhospitable, really. Think of just like vast desert landscapes, almost zero water sources. You're in the middle of the desert. But Laura and I were planning to do an 8-day crossing through this area. And so our bikes were fully laden with more than a week worth of food. We had tons of water on board, and we didn't really have any expectations of what it was going to be out there. And so on this day, we cycled out into this remote area, and we could not believe that Himba tribal people live in these places. So incredibly inhospitable. They live off the land, so they raise livestock out there. They don't really grow many things. It's all kind of tied up in the livestock way of life. So they're like drying goat hides, and we were getting water off them. The Himba people, they have a certain way of dressing. They have clay in their hair because there's no water. They shower using dust rather than water. And some people have never had like a water shower in their lives. They obviously don't speak English. They wear like lots of beads, and yeah, they've got amazing hair, colorful fabrics. Do a Google search of Himba people and you'll get a good idea of what they're like. But anyway, cycling through all of these amazing tribal areas, and then we move into these like incredible Mars-like valleys with all of these strange plants. So people might have heard of a baobab tree, which just has like impossibly large trunks. We went through a whole valley of baobabs and these plants that look like they've come from a Dr. Seuss book. All of this land is like completely untouched because it's so inhospitable. And then throughout the day, going down these smaller and smaller valleys until we get to this incredible drop off. So we're on top of the mountain range and it just drops almost vertically. And the sun is setting and the sky is incredibly red, and just everything around us is so photogenic. And we've just had these amazing interactions with the Himba people. It was just like the whole day was absolutely magical from start to finish, except we set up our tent on this cliff face. And in the middle of the night, there was a crazy windstorm. And so we were like in this incredibly precarious location. And I woke up to the tent flat on my face. And we have like a 4-season, super high speed rated tent. But yeah, we didn't set it up as you should in like really high speed wind conditions. But still, the tent was on my face. I had to get up in the middle of the night and like put rocks all around the tent to like stake us down. And it was just so noisy. Yeah, just a funny way to end like one of the most memorable days in recent years.
A day that's unforgettable matched with a night experience unforgettable as well.
That's right.
My mind there was just, I'm mind blown just hearing your description of what it would have been like through that day. Just so many different reasons. These inhospitable landscapes, to seeing the Himba culture there as well, and the people, to those massive forests, and then camping on a cliff where Mother Nature has the last word as well. It's always the wind. Wow. I love it, Ali. That is brilliant. All right. I'm very conscious this is such a long recording session and I definitely need to wrap the show up now. I'm finishing off with the same 3 questions I ask all my guests. One of them, you as a guest get to go onto the Seek Travel Ride music playlist. So you get to pick a song that goes onto this list, and each song is picked by a guest to be the soundtrack to their adventure. What song is Alee Denham picking to be on this playlist?
I'd be interested to know if this has been picked by another person.
Okay.
So I've picked Home by Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros.
Oh, it isn't. It's a new one.
Beautiful. So this song came out just as I started bike touring. And I remember seeing videos that people were making on Vimeo at that time, because YouTube wasn't really a thing. Everybody was using this song and, it was on the radio. And yeah, so it's called Home. And the famous line is, "Home is whenever I'm with you." So it kind of takes the idea of what home is, and instead of it being a house or a location, it becomes a person. But I kind of like to take it a little bit further, and just because it's not a physical place, it can really be anything. And so the way I see it is it's more of a feeling of comfort and safety than anything. And so the way I relate that to myself is that if I can make myself feel comfortable and safe anywhere, then that would mean that everywhere is home.
Oh, I love it. I love your reasons for picking this and just the introspection that you've had with those lyrics and how they match your thoughts as well. Perfect. Well, you are there. You are added on the playlist. Listeners, you can find it on Spotify, Seek Travel Ride music playlist there as well. Okay, next question. You have the choice, Alee. One day you are told you can cycle forever up a constant, never-ending climb, or alternatively into a constant, never-ending headwind. Each of them will feel equally brutal, but which one were you going to choose?
I'm always going to pick the climb.
So,
Yeah. Climbs, they give you get the nice view. You get to go at a pace where you can see things slowly, like you're not doing the head jerk like as you're flying by somewhere. You can go slow enough that people can walk next to you and just like chat to you as you go up a hill. I also think, so one of my most famous videos is that hills are not harder than the flat. And in the video, I basically make the case that if you have low enough gear ratios, you can make almost any hill easy to ride up. And so I know that my bike has low gear ratios, so that the hill's going to be easy. So I'm perfectly happy with that.
you know when you told me the story just recently there about the wind knocking your tent flat, I thought, you're not going to pick the wind. So
Yeah. The thing that drives me most crazy in a headwind is just the noise in my ears. I think that's the worst thing about a headwind. Like, you can always go slow and grind it out, but that noise is just horrible.
yeah, and it's like if you have the benefit of like turning 180 degrees and going in the other direction, all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, the world is back.
Yeah.
I've often found that as well. Final question for you, Alee. We are nearly there. This is going to be an interesting one just through your past experiences. So you were given the choice one day. You only got to ride 4 hours, so it's like the shortest riding day ever. But you can choose to ride 4 hours on your own or 4 hours with other people. It could be Laura, it could be anyone else. Which one are you going to choose?
That is a really hard one. I'm going to go with other people, because even though I ride with Laura a lot, I can always just ask to ride by myself for a little while. So that means that if I can do that solo time by myself in my normal life, that I should use my 4-hour opportunity to ride with others.
Oh my gosh. I love that you have logically figured out a way that by choosing to ride with others, you could also somehow do the other thing as well. That is really, really cool. I've got one last sneaky question for you, actually, and that is, knowing that you're on a monumental tour through Africa, what are you most looking forward to?
I think it's just continuing my crazy lifestyle. Yeah, I'm excited to learn about different cultures and languages and try different foods and see different wildlife and be able to document everything. If you were going to press me about like which countries I'm most intrigued by, I'm going to go with Sudan. Just heard the most amazing things about Sudan, and I hope that the civil war sort of gets a little bit better for the people there as soon as possible. Morocco fascinates me to no end. And I've heard so many good things about Nigeria that I'm ready to go.
Wow. Again, there's so much for you to look forward to, Alee. I'm excited for you. It often happens I speak to a guest and I interview them, and my first reaction is to go to my bike panniers, throw a whole heap of gear in and go and experience something as well. And you've definitely given me this massive gift of wanderlust. I'm going to leave you with a quote that I found from you again, because listeners, I think this will give you an even better insight into Alee's adventurous spirit and the way that he rides. If ever I invite you for a bike ride, make sure not to come because it's a trap. There will be high levels of overgrowth, landslides, areas, river crossings, and hike a bike. We will have no idea when we will reach our destination, where we will camp, or what dangerous animals we might see along the way. We won't have any form of communication with the outside world, and we are bound to get lost a few times. There will definitely be blood, but hopefully not broken bones, and if my calculations are wildly inaccurate, we may need to ration food and water, but thankfully this is a rare occurrence. Alee, when I came across that, I thought, oh my gosh, this sums your bike nomad adventures up in a complete nutshell. I loved everything about it, and I love that that is the spirit that you take forward into every day of your bike adventures. Alee Denham, thank you so much for being a guest here and sharing your stories, experiences and insights for us all here on Seek Travel Ride.
You're so welcome.
Well, listeners, if you are anything like me, you are thinking massively about taking a bike adventure. Having listened to Alee speak there about his experiences has really made me want to go to my bike, fill my panniers up and just pedal away. And take the adventurous route, take the unplanned, take the uncertainty all in my stride. It's really amazing for me as a host to reflect back on all those experiences that Alee most undoubtedly has had, and yet I can also hear in his responses just how much excitement he has for the experiences which are to come. He travels in such a genuine way, and I think one of the biggest takeaways is the idea of seeing a place fully. And that doesn't mean that you need to ride all the time to see it or that you should ride every road, but it's also fine to take a pause, to interact with people, to do things off the bike, to enjoy a country, and to open your mind beyond the perceptions that we may have about an area before we've even been there as well. Leave the preconceptions at the door, invite adventure, and see the world. As Alee says, it is a safe place and people are kind. I love that. Thank you so much, Alee, for joining the show. And listeners, let's keep an eye out on CyclingAbout to see where Alee's adventures will take him next. If you are enjoying Seek Travel Ride, I definitely encourage you to sign up to our Seek Travel Ride newsletter. I send a newsletter out every single month, and in it I preview upcoming guests and also share insights from our Seek Travel Ride community, which include previous guests as well as listeners. You will also find out ways that you too can get involved in the podcast as well. Check it out. There is a link in the show notes to sign up to the newsletter. Click that link and you get to look forward to Seek Travel Ride hitting your inbox each and every month. Until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.